What is up? We are live. Sorry, guys, we're a couple of minutes late. I was fighting some technical issues with StreamYard. We're here, though, and we're excited. John, we are past the draft. We got to talk a little bit about undrafted free agency, I think. I think there's
one in particular.
Yeah, one in particular, I think. And before we move to, we're going to talk about Zeke, and we're going to talk about, we've got some questions on Twitter today, which was awesome. There's a ton of them, so we're going to get into those. But before we get into all that, talk about the single undrafted free agent that you are excited about. I know there's a lot of guys excited about this particular player, and I'll get our Twitter questions pulled up while you give us your take, because I think it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, I know we talked about it a little bit on Tuesday, but just wanted to reiterate how like the decreased number of juniors in this class kind of has diminished the quality of UDFAs that are available in comparison to normal years. I think in normal years you see the Cowboys bring like probably 3, 4, 5 UDFAs that you're like, they have like a decent chance of actually making the roster and potentially earning a role on the team. But I think this year, why you've seen a lot less talk about the UDFA classes, just because that diminished value due to the NIL in college and all of that. But the one guy who I was really excited about that they brought in, and one guy who I've been a fan of actually dating back almost 2-3 years, is Brevin Spanford from Minnesota, the tight end. He's a guy, he's really interesting, really good size, really good frame for the tight end position. He's the kind of the classic traditional inline blocker frame that you see in the tight end, not these kind of stretch slots or seam stretchers that you see have become in vogue recently. This guy is someone who has really made his hay dating back, like I said, 2-3 years as a really good blocker, really good inline blocker, really good move blocker. And you see that on tape consistently. I mean, I was hitting up the DMs earlier this week with I think I put like 6 or 7 clips in there of Brevin Spanford just completely pancaking defenders. And it's always easy to just nitpick certain plays and to say like, oh, this guy's going to be great. Look at these like 6 or 7 plays. But if you won't find any other college tight ends that are putting that many defenders on their back as consistently as he was. And you see it consistently happen throughout the year. He's really effective in combination blocks with the tackle. You saw him do that against like really, really effective edge defenders in the Big Ten while he was at Minnesota. He did that exceedingly well. You saw him he was especially effective kind of in that move tight end role where they bring stiff blocks to the backside of zone concepts. He was really good at almost decleating defensive backs and really creating movement against linebackers in those situations. And then with just his size and his frame and his leaping ability, he's also a very good short red zone option. I've kind of thought of him as a late stage Mercedes Lewis, the guy who was a big Packers tight end. He played for the Jaguars. I'm not sure where he is now. He might still be with the Packers, but he's been considered kind of like the best blocking tight end in the NFL, him and George Kittle, for quite a long time. And him especially because he's more of an inline guy than Kittle is more of a move blocker who does really good on like I said, those stiff blocks, those moving to the backside, getting pulled around, those type of things. Mercedes Lewis is a little bit more of your classic traditional inline blocker. And I think that's kind of where Brevin Spanford kind of fits in as well. I think he's someone who can earn a role as a blocker. We know how the Cowboys always want to have at least one of their tight ends who specializes in blocking. And when you have Luke Schoonmaker, Jake Ferguson, and I think John Stevens Jr. as the likely top 3 tight ends, I think Brevin Spanford, we've seen in the past that they're not opposed to keeping 4 tight ends, and I think he could be that 4th tight end. He's probably going to be in a competition with the Hunter Lipkes of the team, the Peyton Hendershots, those other guys who are fringe rosterable players at other positions. So, but I really think he has a really good chance of making the 53-man roster, and not only making it, but also having a game day role.
Yeah, I think you've obviously got him nailed. You've seen him a lot more than I have, but I think you've got the concept pretty nailed down here. Is that Peyton Hendershot you're in a lot of trouble here. John Stevens, you got to have another really solid. You're not going to get on the roster this year just because you had a good camp last year.
And I think John Stevens Jr. was on pace to take Hendershot's spot on the team last year before he got injured. I think the only reason Hendershot even made the team was because JSJ had that season-ending injury.
Absolutely, and it's one of my, I don't know, I've kind of got these like tenets that I kind of believe in that you can follow pretty much at any time. And one of them is like just find offensive linemen from the Midwest, like just go to anywhere from like Michigan to Wisconsin to Notre Dame to any of these schools in these Indiana, Wisconsin, Iowa type areas of the country. You can find an offensive lineman who could play. It's kind of the same thing with Big Ten tight ends, and they love to do it. And we've seen it in we've got one on the team right now in Jake Ferguson. They went back to the well again with Luke Schoonmaker in the draft last year, and then you go back to Minnesota this year because that's one of the only conferences out there right now that's really playing with a lot of tight ends. And there's individual schools in other parts of the country that are using tight ends, but it's really concentrated there in the Big Ten in that part of the country. And so I'm always willing to take a shot on one of those kinds of players. And like you said, the draft class this year, because of, this was the last year. We talked about it last week or earlier this week, but we'll just touch on it slightly. This last draft class was the last class with players in it who were true freshmen the year of the pandemic. And so because of that, they got an extra year of eligibility because they could opt out, which means that it just stretched. So these guys are going next year. There won't be a group of guys who can go back to school for a fifth year if they weren't redshirted just because they had a coronavirus exemption for eligibility purposes. So next year you're going to get, yes, the NIL thing is going to keep some guys in school 4 years, but now you won't have the guys who are 3 years in going back for the fourth year, the guys who are 4 years in going back for the fifth year, and then only a few of the guys who go back for the fifth year are going to be, draft worthy. You're going to have a lot deeper of a class coming up next year and in the following years than you have this year. But I think that kind of explains why, we're not sitting here talking about TJ Bass and Hunter Lepke and, like run through these 4 or 5 or 6 undrafted free agents that we're really excited about this year. It really is Brevin Spann-Ford, and that's kind of it in terms of the undrafted guys. And I think normally we would be talking about, hey, this Ryan Flournoy guy that they signed as an undrafted free agent is a guy we're really excited about. Hey, this Justin Rogers guy that they signed as an undrafted free agent is a big space-eating defensive tackle. Maybe he's a guy who we're excited about. But this year, those guys wound up being 5th, 6th, 7th round picks instead of being undrafted free agents. So just a little bit of a different offseason in that approach than typical. The next kind of big story, now that we've kind of covered the undrafted free agents, which normally there's like 3 shows worth of information for undrafted free agents for the Cowboys. But now that we've covered that, the next kind of big story going on in Cowboys land is Zeke is back. So Zeke signed with the Cowboys officially yesterday on May the 1st. Nobody should be surprised that it happened on May the 1st for lots of reasons due to, compensatory situations and all these other types of things. So talk to me about what you think of the Zeke situation. Is it just give me your take on it, and then we'll go through the contract here in a minute too, and talk about why I don't think it's a great deal.
I mean, I'm someone who's been a vocal proponent of not bringing back Zeke for most of the offseason, but when you bring him back for as little as they brought him back for, there's really not much that you can really get mad about, in my opinion. I think he's has such a low compensation level, and just the fact of what he's going to bring to the locker room as a leadership. I mean, the fact that he signed May 1st and that he was already in the charity home run derby right away, that just shows you like what kind of not only what kind of leader he is, but like how he already fits in with the team. Obviously him and Dak are best friends. He's already got strong relationships and ties to many in that on that team and the roster. I think his value there is almost worth what he's getting paid. And
Oh, yeah.
as long as he's on the field and not being a detriment to you, you know, he's not causing turnovers, he's not missing wide open running lanes, he's not missing blocks and pass protection, those type of things. He's kind of being a replacement level player, in all honesty. As long as he's a replacement level running back, I think it's a fine move. I mean, I don't see the difference between signing Zeke and then signing, I don't know, veteran running back TBD who would do
Right.
probably the same exact thing, but not be able to bring the locker room, the leadership that Zeke can bring.
Absolutely. I think for me, as long as he's here to play a role, and as long as he is with the Cowboys,
Yeah, as long as he's not the guy, the number one guy, like he's getting the split like he was before he left the first time, then I'm fine with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll look at the contract here. This is, overthecap.com it's literally the best place to get this information. There are other websites out there. We stick to overthecap.com. Yes. For some context, $1.25 million base salary is the league minimum salary for a player at Zeke's accrued level. So with 8 accrued seasons, the least amount that the Cowboys could pay him in base salary is $1.25 million. He additionally has the signing bonus of $375,000. They paid Brevin Spann-Ford $225,000.
Yeah.
Like that guarantee. Like this is almost nothing. Another $375,000 in per game roster bonuses. Total cap because he was on the 53-man roster or on the active roster for New England for all 16 games. That $375 is considered likely to be earned. So the only difference in between those two, and like I said, we'll do probably like a salary cap 101 at some point in the next month or two, just to cover a lot of these terminologies that we'll wind up using a lot, and to kind of help us fill the offseason, to be honest with you. But but the per game roster bonus at $375, because he played all the games last year for New England, it's considered likely to be earned. So the Cowboys have to account for it now on the salary cap. The other incentives in his contract, one of them is like if the team makes the playoffs, he gets a little bit. If the team makes the playoffs and he has 10 rushing touchdowns, he gets $250,000. And I don't know about you, I'd gladly pay Zeke $250,000 if he gets 10 rushing touchdowns. I think he had 12 the last year he was with the Cowboys. 12. He was north of that last year or in 2022 when he was with the team. But that is not at all what the short yardage rushing touchdown production they got from their backs last year was. So basically, it's essentially a league minimum contract with a signing bonus. And if he plays all 17 games, it bumps up to $2 million. It is nothing that they're paying Zeke to be here. And in addition, if we get into training camp, and I don't think he's going to practice all that much in training camp, probably won't play in the preseason. But if we get through camp and another team or another running back on the team looks fantastic and they just want to give that guy the whole load, or if there's another running back who they sign in free agency that they'd rather have than Zeke, if they cut Zeke and he signs with another team for the league minimum, this is where the league minimum base salary is really important and why the salary being guaranteed doesn't matter. If he signs with another team, it's almost it's almost certain that this $1.25 million is what they call subject to offsets, which means if he signs with another team for the league minimum, the amount that they pay him will offset that amount of guarantees that the Cowboys have for him. So if he gets cut at the end of training camp and signs for the league minimum the next week, right before week 1 or right after week 1, almost all of that $1.25 million comes off the salary cap for the Cowboys, and they're stuck with the $375,000 signing bonus that they paid him, which again is $100,000 or so more than they gave Brevin Spann-Ford as an undrafted free agent in guaranteed money. So again, it's basically nothing is what they're paying him. And if he comes and is the spot I think he's the most useful is in short yardage. We saw the difference. So I went and did some work a couple of days ago to look into this, and on like 3 yards or less to go, and it doesn't matter now, I didn't count like third or fourth down or whatever because I wanted to catch first and goal in there too. But with 3 yards or less to go in 2023 with the Cowboys, Zeke converted like 82% of his carries or some like absurd number for first downs or touchdowns. Tony Pollard's conversion rate in 2023 was about 68% or something like that. So you're looking at, and Zeke's career rate is like 75% or something. So even if he just drops back to his career average, regresses to the mean there, you're still looking at 3 or 4, maybe more first downs or touchdowns handing the ball to Zeke over the course of a season. Think about, an Arizona Cardinals game. You give the ball to him on a 3rd and 2 and he converts a first down and it's a first down instead of a punt. Maybe you win that game and maybe you're not having to play as much. They wound up winning the division, but maybe they're up there in the 1 seed conversation if they have that sort of thing. So for $2 million on the salary cap, max of $3 million with all the performance incentives I talked about, it's nothing. And as long as it's not hey, Ezekiel's in the stadium, we got to give him the ball type of situation from the top level of the organization, there's really nothing to lose from this. And the vibes through training camp in what's been a weird offseason, in a weird offseason for the Cowboys, we saw, and RJ and I talked about it whenever we were here right before the draft or right around the draft. The offseason has been weird. The vibes from Dak and his interview at the Cardinal Health thing that he did, kind of weird. Bring the best friend in for no money. Zeke's going to have energy. Zeke's going to be up for practice. Like the vibes in the building and on the practice field just went like big time benefit for almost no risk and no money. And if that's what this is about, the vibes, the goal line, the short yardage, the pass pro, huge benefit for no money. I'll take it all day long as it's not Zeke's going to get 70% of the touches on offense as the running back. As long as they're splitting this thing up, it'll be fine.
I got an interesting question for you.
Go ahead.
How would you, just since we're talking about the running backs and Zeke, how would you rank the Cowboys like top 4 running backs with Zeke, Royce Freeman, Deuce, and Rico?
That's a great question. And we actually got a Twitter question today about whether Deuce has like a path to the 53 and a path to a real role on game day after kind of what we saw last year. I kind of think you toss them all into a hat and you just shake them up and you pull one of them out. And especially Lepke, Freeman, and Zeke, they're not all that different. Like you just pull one of them out and put it like, Skip Pete, the running backs coach can stand on the sideline and literally draw a name out of a hat and be like, all right, Zeke, you're in, and send him in there. And they could call 80% of the offense with Zeke in there, draw another name out of the hat, and it'd be Royce Freeman. They could call 80% of the offense with him out there, do the same thing with Hunter Lepke. The only exception to that is Deuce, and that's the size stuff, and he's a little bit of a different style of player. But I think probably it's hard to rank those guys. I think Zeke is, if you're talking about when you go to the first training camp practice, who's the first guy in all the drills? It's Zeke, right? It's the veteran. And they kind of needed that veteran presence in that room. Like you can't go totally, completely young in a room like that a lot of times. So they kind of needed that veteran guy to just be the first guy in the drill. But so he's probably the first guy, but it's probably him and then Rico and then Lepke and then Deuce for me probably is because I think Lepke's more useful on a game day roster basis than Deuce is at this point. Deuce is like a super niche role player that can be super fun on offense, I think, but he's not going to give you much on special teams. He's not going to give you much in a lot of the other places either, which running back's not a huge special teams position when Lepke's going to eat up almost all those special team snaps. But
I almost feel like Deuce, for him to earn a role in this team, he has to be the guy who's, he has to do it primarily through his running ability, his rushing ability. He's not someone who's going to get a lot of third down opportunities because he's terrible in pass protection. He's not going to do much on special teams. Like we said, maybe he'll be one of the returners with Turpin back there. We'll give him the diminutive duo return group.
There you go. We got TNT on the left side and we got D&D on the kick return. How about
exactly. That? So maybe like something like that, but I just don't see him like earning a role that's going to a big enough role that's going to earn him a roster spot if he doesn't show out in the preseason, especially the preseason, because in camp you can't really show much as a pure rushing ability. So hopefully in preseason he does a really good job showing his running, because I do think if we're talking pure running ability right now, he's probably the most talented runner on the roster, I would say.
Yeah.
Just with his vision, his ability to make quick cuts. He's not very powerful, but he's very slippery. Those type of things. Like what he did at Kansas State, I still can't get that out of my head. Running behind Cooper Beebe, he looked fantastic for many, many games back then. And I don't think his issues last year just take that entirely out of my head. But from that, I think he's probably the most talented runner. I would say Zeke. It's funny that you say, I think Zeke, Royce Freeman, and Rico Dowdle are kind of all of a very similar guy with like little small differences. Like I would say probably Zeke's probably the best like third down of them all, because he has the ability to catch balls out of the backfield, and he's really good in pass protection. Rico Dowdle's really good in pass protection. Royce Freeman's pretty good in pass protection. I would say Rico's probably the most explosive one of the three right now.
Yeah, I think
his ability to hit the second level and run with violence. He kind of runs kind of like an early Zeke with that kind of. He's not the same tackle breaker, but he's the same kind of violent runner, but I would say Royce probably has the best vision, especially on inside zone and those concepts. Royce Freeman, I was really impressed by his ability to find the right running lanes with the Rams, especially because the Rams, they have so many moving parts. They have so many sift blocks coming across the formation, so much different stimuli that it can kind of mix up the reads a little bit. But he did a really good job staying on his track, making the right reads, being patient, hitting downhill, those type of things. So I think it's going to be an interesting mix about how they mix up these 3 or 4 running backs, however many make the roster, because I think there are different things you can do that can allow the Cowboys to be much more successful than they were last year, especially with the offensive line and a more fine-tuned running scheme, I think. So just going to be interesting to see how they deploy the assets that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that Zeke's been very good at throughout his career, the Cowboys used a lot for a lot of years and used it less this last year. But the Rams really leaned into it last year. And, your conversation about Royce Freeman with the Rams is I think there's a chance this team is a massive duo team, like just Majors and duo is their run game of choice. And, for readers and listeners and all that kind of stuff, duo is basically power without a puller. So usually on a power run, the backside guard will pull around to the front side and kind of lead the running back through.
Down block the front side, pull the backside guard.
Exactly. Everybody down blocks on the front side. The puller comes around, and you create a gap for your running back to run through. Duo is basically 2 double teams up front instead of a down block and a puller, and so they call it power without a puller. It's something they've done a lot in the past. It's something Zeke's really good at running. It's that patience and that, like, he just has that ability to, when there's not a crease there, he's just going to like ease himself into whatever tiny bit of a crease is. And then all of a sudden it looks like the offensive line moved a half a yard and Zeke gets up 3.5 yards down the field. And it's like, how in the world did he do that on that play when there was no movement at all? And he's 3.5, almost 4 yards down the field. So I think there's a chance that's something they want to lean into. They got a lot bigger up front.
Yeah, I was going to say, especially when you talk about the offensive line personnel, all the guys they have kind of major in gap scheme concepts. I mean, that's what Cooper Beebe really was strongest in. That's where Tyler Guyton was at his best.
Absolutely.
It's where I think Tyler Smith can do a lot of his best work. So Zach Martin can do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like,
whatever you want.
Yeah, you think about, like, you can get those 2 double teams, and those 2 double teams could be, Tyler Smith and Cooper Beebe on a double team, and Terrence Steele and Zach Martin on a double team. And that's if Terrence Steele is back to what he was as a run blocker before his injury, that's a really beautiful possibility there up front.
They were phenomenal double teamers before he got hurt. I mean, people were talking about how much of a road grader that Terrence Steele was, and a lot of it was because of the combination blocks that him and Zach Martin, they had such. Not only is it like the inherent power and the technique about how Terrence Steele did a really good job of not hitting high, he would attack the hip, those type of things, but their continuity was just great. When the a lot of times on double teams, when you get that late stage movement by defensive linemen, it's so hard for them to adjust their steps, stay in congruence with each other, hit at the same time, same shoulder, drive, all those little technical details. And they did it
Yeah,
phenomenally all year long
absolutely.
while he was healthy. Last year, you saw some issues as he was trying to come back from his injury, but I think that's something they should definitely get back to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's definitely an appearance that they're going to be leaning further into that gap scheme type run, which they did a lot last year too, which makes me think like they did it last year with the personnel that they have. They probably feel better about the personnel that they've got coming forward. No, I don't think John is in a birdcage. We are going to add a banner for the show of where's John going to be today. That's going to be the background for before the show. So I'm glad it's pretty enough in California over there for you to be outside. That's awesome.
Yes, sir. The wife is here, and she takes precedence in the house with her meeting. So we're out here in the Papasan, and we got the beautiful yard. So we're feeling good.
John's flexing on us while it storms outside my window here. So, but I also have an interesting take from Ultra Cowboy. This is one of those things about the running back position that always exists out there. He says, I believe the Cowboys trade for Khalil Herbert or Dameon Pierce. The Cowboys will have 9 picks in 2025, which includes comp picks. Absolutely. We've talked a lot about how we don't necessarily want to be trading away a lot of picks out of the 25 class. We feel like it's going to be a really good class just from a number standpoint of players available. And if they are, preparing to make some sort of transition as a franchise, you want to have as many of those draft picks as you could possibly have. Because if you do need to go quarterback hunting, then you need as many of those picks to have the resources. But there's definitely always the possibility that one of those guys gets cut coming out of camp. I mean, yeah. Dameon Pierce, he's sitting behind 2 or 3 guys now with what Houston has done and with Joe Mixon and what they had, all that kind of stuff last year. There's definitely a chance that Dameon Pierce winds up on the street at the end of camp. And, you just, haul him up I-45 and he's in Dallas in 4 hours and away you go. So I definitely think that is a possibility.
I think if the Cowboys are going to make a trade, I don't think running back is the position, especially when, like I said, you have the 3 that we have that are so similar. I don't think unless you're going to get someone that's a substantial improvement over what you have, I don't see the necessity to trade. And I don't think either of those guys, even though I do think they are better than what the Cowboys have, I don't think they're better enough that would warrant you needing to trade an asset to get them. I think if you're going to trade to upgrade a position, you got to trade to upgrade the defensive tackle depth. I think that is kind of the area that if the Cowboys make a trade, that's the kind of spot that I would be looking at personally, because I think that is the kind of the blinking light right now on the Cowboys roster it's really not up to snuff, and that could have bad consequences for when the season rolls around if you roll with just the defensive tackle group that they have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the questions that we got several times in some variation or another has to do with what changes for this Cowboys defense with Mike Zimmer as the defensive coordinator versus Dan Quinn, even to the extent of, what players do we expect to see big bumps in what they're capable of and what they might do in a Mike Zimmer defense, and then what players might, take a hit from the switch. And along with that, the take a hit from the switch, Alec Ventura on Twitter, it will always be Twitter, even if they ding me in the algorithm for saying it that way. He says Stephen Jones mentioned maybe trading some of Dan Quinn's quote unquote guys to Washington in exchange for guys who fit Zimmer's scheme better in the post-draft press conference. Who do you think might be one of those Dan Quinn guys who would suffer from a scheme change like this? That may be an opportunity for the Cowboys to make a trade. He mentions at the end of the question maybe Osa for Jonathan Allen or Chauncey / Nahshon Wright maybe for John Ridgeway or something like that.
Yeah, interesting. The first touch on the first part about the changes in the scheme, just so fans have an idea of what the Zimmer scheme kind of is before we pick, so that they understand when we select whatever players we want from the Commanders team to trade over here, why those make sense. And I kind of got some insight to that over the draft weekend. I was talking to a certain Cowboys defensive player. I DMing each other, and he kind of gave me some insight into what Zimmer's kind of plan, early, at least the early remnants of what his plan is for the defense. And it seems like they're going to be doing things a lot differently, especially up front, and honestly, coverage wise too. You're going to be seeing them play kind of a quarters based coverage. It seemed like a too high quarters based defense from that. So you got two high safeties, obviously quarters. The cornerbacks and the two safeties are all responsible for the four vertical zones, blah, 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 all that stuff. And as far as up front, from what they were telling me up front, it's not going to be a traditional 3-4, but it's going to have a ton of 3-4 like concepts in it. And you're going to see some of their players move around a little bit, like some guys that played the edge, that play defense. Traditional defensive end role last year, may be playing more of a Sam linebacker-ish role this year, where they're standing up a little bit more, being moved around a little bit more, those type of things. But you're going to see a lot more two-gapping principles, especially from the nose tackle up front, the guy who's playing in between the A-gaps, and the base or the close side defensive end. So the big defensive end, quote unquote, and that you hear about in 4-3s. And that's going to be like DeMarcus Lawrence and Marshawn Nealons of the world are going to be two gapping or playing gap and a half kind of things there to two gap. And then in nose tackles, you know, the Justin Rogers, the Mozzie Smiths, they're going to be playing a lot of traditional two gapping techniques there. So you're seeing that's a lot different between Dan Quinn, because we know Dan Quinn likes to get his guys upfield to penetrate and make plays and to cause backfield disruption. So you're going to,
Go ahead. No, you're good. You're good.
Yeah, so you're going to be seeing the defensive line, instead of like trying to create disruption, they're going to be kind of creating a wall up front. So don't be surprised if you see the Cowboys kind of, you know, maybe their tackle for loss numbers go down while their average depth of tackle actually goes up, I would say, or is less
improves, maybe.
Yeah, improve. There you go.
It's like draft slot. You say you're going to get drafted higher, but the number goes down, right?
Yeah, exactly. So closer to the line of scrimmage. And I think it, given the especially the guys that got at linebacker, I'd say this type of defense is going to lend itself a lot better to the linebacker types that we have on the roster. So that's going to be interesting. And yeah, so that's just kind of like the little download I got. Obviously, it's not it's not the whole wide-ranging defense about how it's going to be played, but just some little nuggets that I received over draft week, and I thought that was very interesting. And I think it kind of points to the kind of players on the Commanders team that you would want to get. Like, obviously, if you can get a Jonathan Allen or a Daron Payne, that would be fantastic, and each one of them would be significant upgrades to the Cowboys defensive line. But I just doubt that the Washington Commanders would want to trade either of those guys. So the guy I kind of think, given the skill set, is Fedarian Mathis, the defensive tackle for Washington. I think he's the guy who's, if the Cowboys were going to look for someone who didn't really fit Dan Quinn's scheme, he comes from that Nick Saban scheme, which is much more similar to what Zimmer's going to be doing with their guys, two gapping, gap and a half, create a wall, not really penetrating initially, kind of playing through blocks type of thing. He's very, very used to doing that, and he did that with the Commanders in the past before they switched to Dan Quinn. So I think he's the type of guy that doesn't really fit what Dan Quinn types to do. And if there's a trade to be made, I think that is one of the guys that they could kind of go after. And he would be a nice additional rotation member to the Cowboys nose tackle group, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to go out and see them add to the top of the defensive tackle depth chart, which my typical approach I like to do is I like to add guys at the top and allow everybody else to drop down the slot, and it makes everybody better by fitting their role. It's like when DeMarcus Lawrence was the primary defensive end for the Cowboys couldn't get enough sacks because DeMarcus Lawrence just isn't the kind of player who's going to consistently produce 12, 15 sacks. He's extremely productive in a ton of ways. He's massively disruptive and extremely valuable, but he's not the guy who on a consistent basis is going to put up 12 to 15 sacks. But when you put a guy with him in Micah Parsons, who is going to produce that number of sacks, then that puts Tank in an awesome position to be able to be who he is, and that have the maximum impact on your defense as a whole. But on the defensive tackle front, they have so much invested in Mozzie Smith, and Oso Odighizuwa is such a good player that I don't think they won't want to add to the top of the depth chart. But somebody, I mean, Alec mentioned John Ridgeway in his original post. Is like, yeah, Dan Quinn was here when John Ridgeway was drafted, but there's always the chance that with as much defensive tackle depth, because they just drafted Johnny Newton too this past draft. So there's a chance that somebody like that can come in and actually be a legitimate nose tackle too that you really just don't have on this roster right now. I think those are the kind of fits that you're looking for on the trade market if you're out there hunting trades. In terms of who wins, we talked about him a little bit, who benefits from the switch. I think Mozzie is maybe one of the 2 or 3 guys in the entire scheme that benefits the most. Easy. Another guy I think really is going to shine in this situation is Donovan Wilson. Because if you remember 2020, Mike Nolan comes in and he's trying to play this quarter style defense with no players and he's not very good at coaching it and all this other kind of stuff. But that's really the year Donovan Wilson broke out, playing kind of that quarter safety where he's got the opportunity to read number 2 to number 1, like read the stems of these guys and just break downhill on underneath routes. And the disruption and the chaos and the damage that he left in his wake, playing in that kind of defense is something I think is going to benefit him again this year. But Mozzie being able to go back a lot to what he played more similarly in college, where he now no longer has to feel like, man, I got to get off the ball. Like I got to get off the ball and go. He can just allow himself to play 2 gaps, take on the center in front of him, stalemate the center, not get beat by double teams because he's so worried about getting off the ball that he winds up getting turned and pushed out of his gap. Like just be kind of like I talked about with Tyler Guy, just be really big and strong and don't get moved. And then as your hands get better and as your technique gets better, now you've got a chance to make plays at and behind the line of scrimmage as a nose tackle.
I agree 100% on both fronts. And as far as Donovan Wilson, I feel like talking point that has been underrated throughout this offseason is his coverage ability has been extremely underrated. Just because he's not the classic coverman, guy you're going to put in the slot or the guy you want to put single high deep to cover, and he doesn't really thrive in those 2 areas. So people say, oh, he's not good in coverage. He's really good in these short zone, these quarter safety roles. These things are the things that he thrives in. These are the type of playing top down coverage is the type of thing that he really, in a confined space, are things that he really thrives when he's doing. And then when you combine that with his ability to run the alley, to be a run defender, we've even seen his ability to take on 300-pound blockers in the box and stuff. So this is the type of talent that you don't just get rid of quickly. And I think a lot of the issues people were saying, like about, the faction of the Cowboys fandom that was saying that the Cowboys needed to upgrade the safety position. I think it's because they were vastly underrating Donovan Wilson's coverage ability, and they just see him as a box guy that makes plays against the run, and they underrate the value that he can add in coverage in a quarter system. So I think that was a great point by you. He's going to be really good, I think, in the Zimmer scheme, and something that I think we've both been talking about since the day Zimmer was hired.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with Dono, a lot of the safety conversation with the Cowboys and the troubles that they may have had at the safety position may have left the building when the new league year started and hasn't entered another building yet.
Talking about a certain guy that searches his name quite a bit.
We'll just call him Beetlejuice, because if you say his name too many times, he pops up and appears. So we I think a lot of those problems left the building. I'll say it this way. There's a reason why that player didn't fit in a Mike Zimmer defense in Minnesota and couldn't get on the field. But then when he comes to a defense that does almost nothing but play cover 1-man coverage, now he all of a sudden gets on the field, and anytime they have to do anything else is just trouble. There are reasons for that, and there's a reason why he hasn't been signed yet, even by Dan Quinn. And yeah, as Elazar mentions, Dono played a lot of slot at A&M. They played a lot of 3 safeties when he was at A&M. And so in college, the 3 safeties is kind of like a quarters based, like one of the safeties winds up being kind of your slot defender on either side. So he would rotate down into the slot a lot whenever he was playing there. And so I think, like you said, Dono is going to be a huge benefit in this system. And Mozzie, like we mentioned, is there anybody that you could think of that just thinking about who they are as a player, the way they fit with Dan Quinn, may not be the best fit with Zim?
You know, it's kind of hard because a lot of those guys aren't on the team anymore, really. Like, I think, like, the one guy, maybe from a coverage standpoint, that I think he can do it. I'm very confident personally that he can do it, but we just haven't seen him play the diversity in coverage that he will be asked to do with Zimmer. Is maybe a Deron Bland isn't like the best fit for a Zimmer quote unquote defensive back, but I think he's so good that he's going to fit it well and he's going to learn on the fly and be fine there. But I would just say he's someone who has thrived in playing, the Dan Quinn style, the cover threes, the cover one man, those type of things. He hasn't played a ton of like quarters based stuff. It's going to be a lot different rules wise or stuff that he's going to be doing, and a lot more playing with his eyes on the cube or eyes to the backfield rather than eyes on your man type thing. So it's going to be interesting. Maybe him, but I don't really see many other guys on the team that aren't going to be good fits. It's like even guys like Micah Parsons, whose jobs are going to change quite a bit. I think he's going to thrive in the role that they're going to put him in.
For me, I think there's less scheme problems with players on the team.
Yeah,
and
I would
more,
say maybe Chauncey Golson doesn't really.
But even like I almost think Golson's going to wind up being an edge and going to be that one of those base strong side defensive ends that like can maybe eat some of those early down snaps to keep Tank from wearing out and all that kind of stuff.
I think that too, but then again, you look at the defensive tackle depth chart and who's going to
play
backup
tackle exactly. Yeah,
tech there. It's like there literally is no one if you don't have Chauncey go there. It's like
nobody. We don't know anything about Junior Fehoko.
Yeah. And I think Fehoko is even more a defensive end in this scheme. It would be a 3 technique. So it's like I would like Chauncey Golson to be that big defensive end, kind of be in that Marshawn Nealon, DeMarcus Lawrence role, but I just don't see how that's possible given the current personnel on the roster if they don't make any moves.
Yeah, somebody's got to play inside, and they don't have those guys right now. I do think that there's a chance that there's some like coaching style, player attitude type situations with the Cowboys. And I was listening to Nate and Robert on the Athletic Football Show. We're going to mourn the loss of that pairing as a podcast duo, but they were talking about. It's going to be exciting to see what Nate's got going next, but it's sad to see that it feels like losing 2 of my football buddies that talk to me about football every day in my head. But but they mentioned that like Micah's energy is different than like it's unique. It's not bad. It's not good. It's not like Micah just has like a unique way of carrying himself, a unique way of talking to coaches and talking to teammates and all that kind of stuff. And that DQ was better than any coach he's ever had, high school, college, wherever, at unlocking that and it relating to that and turning that into a productive thing that allows him to thrive on the field. That's not going to be who Zimmer is.
No.
And so
it's not going to be like the fatherly figure that kind of,
Right. He's not going to be Uncle Dan with the backwards hat with the, like fist bumps, chest bumps, all that kind of, that's not who Zimmer's going to be. And so it's going to be interesting to see there, Micah, I worry about that a little bit with, I worry about it a little bit with, Sam Williams and the undisciplined and the, be where you want to be and all that kind of stuff. Like Zim's, you're going to be in the right gap where you're supposed to be with Zimmer, or you're not going to play.
And he's going to, he'll bench us and have
he's
zero
going to bench you. And he's going to MF you all the way from the field to the bench whenever you're sitting there. So there's some of that kind of stuff that I think about and worry about a little bit just because of the vibe change. I do think that having somebody like Al Harris carry over from one to the next and have some insight into who these guys are. We talked about Scott McCurley last time, but that's even the same kind of deal is having those guys carry over and be able to kind of translate the vibes and relate to one another and have somebody have them be a sounding board for them to come talk to and all that kind of stuff.
I think the underrated loss, I think Aiden Durde is going to be a big loss for the Cowboys. Absolutely. I mean, there's a reason why everyone's favorite defensive coordinator, made a point to hire Aiden Durde to be his defensive coordinator. That's how
Yep.
impressive of not only a coach, but a teacher, all of those different facets that he is. And I think the Cowboys are going to miss him significantly. Not that I have anything bad to say about Greg Ellis or that I've heard anything bad to say. I'm actually pretty excited to see what kind of his imprint gets put on this defensive line. But I do know that Durde is one of the best defensive line coaches in the NFL, and the Cowboys are going to miss having him for sure.
And we're going to miss the swirly font on the sideline
100%.
videos too. That may be the biggest loss if we're being honest. The content will suffer, but yeah, I think that kind of, I can't really think of anybody, like you said, from an on-field standpoint that is that's gonna suffer from this kind of a switch. Where, like you said, maybe Deron Bland, just because it's something he just played a ton of man at Fresno. Comes to the Cowboys, plays a ton of man with Dan Quinn.
But he's a Zimmer type corner in the way he plays. The way he tackles, his physicality. I think Zimmer is going to find, even if there are some maybe bumps in the road schematically, play style wise, Zimmer's going to fall in love with him, I think, almost immediately, or if he hasn't already.
Absolutely. And again, Al Harris translating from one staff to the other is going to help be able to translate everything, even if Al has not been in the past like a super scheme heavy guy as a DB's coach. He's going to be able to translate the play style, and this is how you play this technique and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't worry too much about the secondary in the way it's going to work out. The only other real couple of questions that we got had a little bit to do with, what do we think the best 5 offensive linemen looks like for the Cowboys? Do we think that involves Tyler? And the question kind of related to the idea that we know, or we really feel like Cooper Beebe is one of the best 5 offensive linemen for the Cowboys.
He is.
So with that being the case, is there a world where either Tyler Guyton or Terrence Steele is not one of those best 5, and you wind up with, maybe TJ Bass at guard is a better option, with TJ Bass at guard and Tyler Smith at tackle, and Tyler Guyton playing right tackle or Terrence Steele playing right tackle, and one of those two guys wind up not in your best 5. I think there's a chance that maybe that could be a possibility, but there's no way they move Tyler Smith to left tackle and don't play Tyler Guyton at left tackle.
I mean, if your first round left tackle can't beat out a second-year undrafted free agent guard to be a part of the best 5, that's an issue.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Even though you're not basing things on year 1 and stuff like that, if that happens, that is a problem. And you should not, that means something went wrong, and you should not be too excited about the possibilities of what that means if that does happen.
Yeah, I think there's like the slimmest bit of a chance that, we got another question about this, about what happens if Terrence Steele in 2024 looks like he looked in the first half of 2023. There's like a smallest little bit of a chance that something like that happens, and then you turn around and you're looking at maybe halfway through the season, as crazy as this sounds, the best option is to move Tyler Guyton from left tackle to right tackle, which is crazy to do with a rookie. You wouldn't want to do that. But they will say, Tyler Guyton played right tackle in college.
Wilder shit last year.
Oh, man. Yeah, they've done crazy switches
with his offensive line rotation. Some of them were galaxy brain. I was like, what are we doing?
So we've seen that from the last 2. Yeah, we've seen that from the last 2 offensive line coaches. Right after Mike McCarthy said, this isn't fantasy football, these guys have positions, they just flip-flop these guys all over the place. But I think there's a small little chance that something happens with Terrence Steele and he's not the right tackle that you need. He's just not a starting level right tackle. There is that chance.
Yep.
And we can get into the cap implications on another show of what happens if we move on from some of these guys after this year. But in that world, maybe they look at it and go, you know what, to try to make a playoff push this year and put Dak in the best position to succeed in the playoffs, our best option is to flip Tyler Guyton back to the right side.
I think it would be if we wanted to take players' preferences out of it in that situation.
It's Zach Martin.
Zach Martin to right tackle, put homeboy from Oregon.
TJ Bass. Yep.
TJ Bass. I don't know why I want to call him Alex Bass every time, but TJ Bass, put him at right guard, and that is going to be your best 5. I would say that's a better 5 than moving Tyler Guyton from left to right.
Yeah.
And all of that. And 2, I think I think it makes more sense. I think Zach Martin, we've seen, he doesn't want to do it, obviously. We've seen him do it at a high level. He can
like
do it
an
at a high
extreme,
level.
like a ridiculously
I had a
high
tweet earlier. The Cowboys' best tackle on the roster right now
is
is
Zach
Zach
Martin.
Martin.
Yes,
Without a doubt.
100%.
Without a
Absolutely.
doubt.
Yeah. But again, he's a, 10-year vet,
Yeah.
surefire first ballot Hall of Famer. Like you don't walk into that guy and say, hey, you're switching positions whether you like it or not. Like that's because he'll just leave. Like he'll be like, all right, peace, I'm gone.
Like you got to think, like we're at that point where is he like, I would rather retire than have to
exactly. Like I'm
implement
not going to go play right tackle. I'm going to retire. Yeah, exactly. And so I think that if something happens with Terrence Steele, injury, whatever, your best five for sure includes TJ Bass. It's just a matter of now who becomes the right tackle. Is it Awesome Richards just becomes your right tackle and that's your cleanest transition? Or does TJ Bass insert inside and Tyler Smith goes outside and then Tyler Guyton goes across? That's getting, in theory, that's getting worse at 3 spots to fix one. But if Awesome Richards isn't ready to be a real life player and Matt Waletzko isn't ready to be a real life player, the one thing you can't have, you can downgrade from like good to average at 5 offensive line positions and be okay. The one thing you can't have is just like a swinging gate that's a terrible problem.
Weak link.
Exactly. It's a weak link system, just like the secondary. Is if you have a really, really weak link, you're in big trouble. So it's okay to downgrade 3 spots from good or plus to average. It's not okay to take one spot from average to terrible. And that would be the scenario where that would happen. But I think, I hope, and I'm sure you do too, that Terrence Steele is the 2022 Terrence Steele, and the second half of 2023 got a lot better.
Everything from his career up until this point tells me that he's going to get it back in the right spot. I mean, he's one of the most hardest and tireless workers on the team. Go back and look at the project that he was coming out of Texas Tech. That dude was bad. He was
real bad, real bad. We're old enough to remember the reaction whenever they announced like an hour and a half before the Rams game to start that season that he was going to be the starting right tackle. Because I don't remember who it was. Was it Cam Irving was the swing tackle that year? And so everybody just assumed, okay, Cam Irving's going to go be the right tackle because Lyle Collins, is hurt or not with the team or whatever. Cam Irving's just going to go be the right tackle until we get it settled. And then they just plugged Terrence Steele out there and they were like, hey, this is our guy. And so for one, credit to Joe Philbin and Mike McCarthy for seeing what he could be and trusting it, even though it was rough at times that first year. But you don't get development from those guys like that if they don't get the chance to play. And they just put him out there and trusted him to play, and he played really well. John, do you have any kind of takes that are sitting heavy on your mind that you want to get off your heart over the course of the next couple of minutes before we finish the hour up here?
Not really that I can really think of off the top of my head. I'm just excited about this season. Most of my brain goes to the defensive side of the ball. I'm really excited to see what Zimmer's defense is going to look like schematically, especially after I talked to the Cowboys defender over the past weekend to get some little inside nuggets and hear about how excited they are about the schematic changes and how much more flexible it's going to give them an ability to, defend against the motion concepts that gave them so many issues, being able to rotate the safeties down and all of these different things. I think the Cowboys are just going to have a lot more tools in their tool chest to be able to combat the things that offenses had success against them last year. So I'm just really excited to see that kind of cat and mouse game that's going to go on this year from an X's and O's perspective, because I think as great as Dan Quinn was, from a coaching ability, from teaching, from a mentor, from a leadership, locker room, I think Zimmer is all those same things, but in a schematic sense. I think he's a real schematic genius, whereas Dan Quinn is kind of a person-to-person genius. So I'm excited to see how that change affects the defense and everything. So that's just kind of what I'm looking forward to.
Absolutely. Guys, I'm jacked up about the offseason. I think we're going to wind up treating May. I think we're going to get real nerdy in the month of May.
Let's get nerdy.
I think we're going to dive like some super deep scheme stuff. We'll do salary cap stuff. We're going to get real nerdy in the month of May. and then we'll get in June. We'll kind of pivot and we'll start getting ready for position groups and training camp and all that kind of stuff. We'll take questions. I've never had a podcast before where we took questions. I thought it was awesome. I was surprised, to be honest with you, how many responses, how many questions we got. We'll do Twitter questions pretty regularly just because we are here, because we want to communicate with you guys and talk with you guys and talk about what you guys want to talk about. Twitter questions is a great way to do that. So we'll do that pretty regularly. I'm really excited about this off season, and I'm excited about the season. We'll see about the team on the field, but this team right here, John and I, we're going to get you through the whole season, and we're going to be better fans, and we're going to enjoy the season, whether they're winning 13 games or whether they're struggling to get into the playoff picture.
Yes, sir. I think it's going to be an interesting year no matter where it goes. And no matter what, we know next offseason is going to be hot fire, spitting hot fire, whether it's, the whole Dak situation or the contract negotiations or getting a whole new coaching staff, whatever have it be. It's going to be the next 365 days in Cowboys land are going to be exciting without a doubt.
Absolutely. The content is going to be amazing. Maybe this time next week we're breaking down a CeeDee Lamb contract or something like that. We'll go deep on.
I hope so.
Keep our fingers crossed, right? All right, guys, we're gonna run. Thank y'all so much for joining us, the Blue Star Lunch Hour. If you're a business owner, again, it's brought to you by Silver Moon Financial. If you're a business owner, look down there. There's a link to a guide to QuickBooks Online that will help you, get a hand around your business financials. Because if you don't, you're in big trouble. John, thanks so much, man. We will see you later.